I'll ask to just say hello in just a moment. We are going to record the session so that those who are not able to log in will have an opportunity to view it later. So Emma, have you hit record yet? I just want to make sure we...
Yes, it's recording.
Okay, perfect. So just a little bit for those about the Parent Resource Center, for those of you who have not yet visited us or accessed our supports and services, we support all families in Arlington Public Schools with a focus especially on families who might have a student with receiving special education services, or a student who has a Section 504 plan, or students or parents who are just concerned about their child's academic or social or emotional development in school. We collaborate with and support families in a variety of ways. We offer one-to-one consultations with families, either here at our office or on a video chat like this, or by phone. We have a great lending library, and we also have just recently added some wonderful books, audiobooks and ebooks too. So we'll be glad to tell you more about those. And we have lots of topics related to disabilities, but also just general parenting topics like parenting teens and, preparing for college, or helping your child learn how to cope with frustration or sibling rivalry. So please let us know if you're interested in that. I'll put our contact information in the chat. And then we also have a weekly newsletter that we send out with just updates and about events like this and other events happening either in the school district or in the community. And then finally, we offer lots of learning sessions like this where we can learn together with families. So to learn more about the Parent Resource Center, again, in just a moment, I'll put the information in the chat. But it is my great pleasure. I'm not sure if any of our student services team wanted to say a quick hello. Wendy or Heather or Jennifer, would anybody else like to share a greeting from student services, or shall we toss to Elise?
Thank you, Kathleen. We're really excited. Thank you to the PRC for hosting this for us today. I won't take a lot of time other than to say thank you to the PRC and thank you to Elise. We're excited to offer this for our parent community.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Emma, I don't think we have anybody in Spanish, but Emma at the Parent Resource Center is bilingual and speaks English and Spanish. Emma, would you like to just offer a greeting in Spanish and let folks know that the subtitles are up and running?
Sure. Buenos días, mi nombre es Emma Parral y solamente les quiero decir que pusimos los subtítulos en español y cualquier pregunta lo pueden poner en la cajita del chat. Gracias.
Okay, gracias, Emma. Okay, so without any further ado, it is a great pleasure to, as Wendy did, welcome and thank Elise Kenney, who is the Director of Counseling. And actually, Elise, I'm sorry, it's Elise Kenney-Caldwell, I think. Right?
As of November, it is now, yes.
Congratulations, Elise.
Yeah.
And this is the Director of Counseling at Williamsburg Middle School. So Elise, thank you so much, and I'll toss it over to you now.
All right. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and presenting today. I'm going to be going over kind of understanding the SEL survey that students have taken earlier in the fall. But if your students were in the system last year with an APS, they took it in the spring of last year as well. Though much of the information may be duplicated from the that will be in the elementary session, I will be focusing some of sort of anecdotal and some of the tips to that secondary lens of middle and high school. So again, we're going to go over what SEL is, why it's important, what did the SEL survey measure, what do your students' results mean, what you can do to help your child at home develop those SEL skills, and then conclude with, if you do have concerns about your student around their social emotional growth, who can you go to for support around those questions. All right, so we are going to start with what is SEL. So it's defined by what they call CASEL, but it's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. CASEL provides schools a nice framework and system for the development of their social emotional programs and curriculum that not only is with school, but outreaches to families and communities as well. So defined social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And we'll, in a moment, break down the categories of which those different areas are put in. But it's also important to define what SEL is not. So some of the positives that come out of social emotional learning is boosting the academic performance, is helping just the holistic child with their well-being and their decision-making and their awareness of themselves and the world around them. But to highlight some of the things it's not a distraction from academics, so it's not pulling them out of their academic learning. It's not therapy. I think sometimes we hear social emotional and we think right away, oh, that must be a meeting with the school counselor, and that must be some sort of counseling intervention, when it is really just the skill set that we all develop in helping students continue to develop and grow in those different areas. And it's not always taught by counselors. I know here at Williamsburg and across most of the county have it taught by classroom teachers. And it's not sort of any sort of specific agenda driven. It is meant to be those developmental foundational skills that we all go through, and just supporting students in the exploration of those. So the CASEL competencies, and these will look a little bit different than the categories that the survey came out with. However, many of them overlap and could be embedded with them. But as far as the CASEL competencies that help drive our sort of benchmarking of where we would like students to develop, the first is self-awareness, and that's that understanding of your own emotions and thoughts and values and how they influence those around you. So at the secondary level, certainly starting in middle school, students really start to disaggregate their feelings into those additional categories rather than those large, big feelings. I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry. They start to see sort of the shades of gray within those emotions. So maybe I'm not angry, but I'm getting frustrated. I'm not sad, I'm disappointed. So it's being able to really name those emotions in order to be able to know what to do with them, and be able to listen to them and make choices from them. The next would be self-management, and that's almost that sort of next step. Once I've been able to identify and I'm aware of my emotions, how might I manage them both at low levels and when they get to a level that it becomes sort of difficult to manage. And when is it a time where I can manage those emotions on my own as a student, and when do I maybe need to go ask the support of a trusted adult, be it a parent, a coach, somebody at school to help manage those thoughts and emotions. The next is the social awareness, understanding the perspectives of others and empathize with others. Obviously, a important component at any age, but certainly once they hit that secondary level, and the opinions and comparisons to what their peers are doing and what their peers think is important, this becomes really important for students to be able to really analyze others' perspectives and sort of how do you integrate that into your own value system. The next, obviously getting more important in secondary, is those relationship skills of maintaining really healthy and supportive relationships. You're moving out of elementary, which sometimes our relationships and friendships are based on proximity. And once you get more and more peers around you that weren't necessarily ones you grew up in, then you start to really make those decisions of who do I kind of have in my quality world, and who is maybe just an acquaintance. And even that idea of those different levels of relationships and that they come into our lives for different reasons, for different seasons, and different levels of closeness. And then the last is almost kind of taking it all and putting it together, responsible decision making based on all of those awareness and management skills. How do I use that to make those caring and constructive choices about my behavior and my interactions with those around me and the world around me? So just building on that, and some of the benefits of SEL that have been identified is that we do see that the students who are progressing through those different competencies will lead to improved academic outcomes. And you can see that that would be sort of a logical byproduct when I'm managing myself and I'm aware of how what I think and feel impacts myself and those around me. It's going to help with some of those self-control skills, sort of those, I'm going to choose this instead of this, instead of going and playing video games, which is what I really want to do. I'm going to inhibit that and I'm going to go ahead and get my homework done. So those are the kind of things that development of those SEL skills will lead to. And so as you can see, that would trickle into other areas such as wise financial investments. I'm not going to make those investments on strong emotion. Instead of, I'm going to make a rational decision about that. And then improving those relationships around them. So the pivot comes when we look at what the students, based on the questions that they answered in the SEL survey and how they're categorized. So in the description of these, you can kind of see how the overlap is, and you can tie some of the CASEL competencies to those that are in this one. The first, which is new for, which is not in the CASEL competencies, which is that growth mindset, which is that student perception of whether they have the potential to choose those factors that are central to their performance in school. So that growth mindset, though, really does get into that awareness, that my emotional awareness, my awareness of my thoughts and feelings, because in order to sort of choose a different thought instead of a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, you would need to have those foundational skills that we find in the self-awareness and the self-management. The next is the self-efficacy, and that's how much students believe they can succeed in achieving academic outcomes. And this is one that APS is really highlighting for us this year because students, I think this is one of the harder skills for students to understand. I know in talking and having our students here at Williamsburg reflect on this area, they, mentioned how they feel like they're supposed to remember everything from year to year instead of maybe some big takeaways or being able to the process of learning. So in realizing that in our support for students around self-efficacy, it's also supporting their perception of what is expected of them. And sometimes our students think that if they learn something, they're supposed to remember it the next year or 2 years from now. And just also setting those kind of those awarenesses in themselves that that's not really something that we would expect of anybody. The next is the self-management. And so in looking at your students' results, and we're going to see an example of that, you're going to notice that if your student took it last year, you're just going to get one data point for this year because those self-management, that self-management category was not on the survey last year. And this is just how well students manage their emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations. And the last is that social awareness, which does tie directly to that other CASEL competencies, which is that understanding of others' perspectives for that. So when we're looking at the survey, I also just want to make sure everybody knows how to get to the survey. And when you're trying to find it, because especially when you get into secondary, when you go to the documents tab in your parent view, you'll have quite the list of different documents. If you're certainly in high school, you're going to have a long list of different historical documents for your student. So one way to quickly and easily find it is once you're in parent view and go to the documents tab, there's a category where it will say report card, test report, those categories that say survey. So that's a quick way to quickly find it. And you're going to have two documents that will be under the survey category when you're looking at your SEL report. The first is going to be kind of an overview, and it gives you a little bit of background and a little bit of information about the SEL survey. And then the second document, which is going to be tied to your student's ID, will be those specific results where you can see overall how your student rated in that different category. So if you are finding that your document is not there, or you're having a hard time finding it, you can also reach out to your grade level school so that they can support you in finding that. Probably the easiest person secondary wise to take a look and try to find that is their grade level counselor. And they'll be able to kind of look into that and just to ensure that it was attached in there. When you look at the results, it's going to have your students' rating and overall rating based on how they answered those questions. So it's going to be a rating from 1 to 5. And when we're looking at it, you're looking at whether it's a high strength or a low strength. And I like the way this is put because if it's on the lower end, it's not necessarily that they have a weakness in that area. It's just maybe something that is a more new emerging skill for them. So it's not maybe the same strength as a different category, because all of these skills are all buildable and they're all learnable, and a student can progress in them with some support. So if it is your student is rating themselves on the lower end of them when they're answering those questions, it's not necessarily that it's an area of weakness for them. And we also like to caution, this is one moment. They took this survey on one day and in one moment, and you're on here because you have a secondary student. So as you know, with teenagers, a week later or later on that day, you could have gotten a different rating in those. So also with those scores that maybe are on the lower end, so when you're looking at a 1 to 2, it's a great conversation with your student to say, do you remember taking this? Full disclosure, we do have some students that sort of click through. So that's another conversation that can be had with your student of, did you fill this out that day? So, and that can create another conversation about sort of their perception around the social emotional learning and sort of their thoughts on it. It can still create a really good conversation coming out of it. So in looking at the results, so this is an example, as you can see with the self-management, it's just that one data point because it was not a category last year. But what it's going to give you is the definition of the skill, where your student rates for the number of questions that were in it, and then some things to try as from the perspective of your student. In breaking down the number of questions for students, there was 6 questions in the growth mindset. There was 10 questions with the self-management, 8 questions around the social awareness, and then 5 questions around the self-efficacy. So that gives you an idea of how many questions that they were asked that created that rating for them. So when you're looking at your student and it improved or it stayed the same, that can be a nice conversation starter with your student as well of, what do you think was the difference between when you took this before and you took it this time, that you would answer the questions around that area. So when we're looking at reading the survey results, you're not only looking at it to kind of see how your student rated themselves, but it's also a unique opportunity of a conversation starter that has a little bit more specific of a question rather than just, how are you doing? How is your day? This can be a conversation starter with your student if they're open to having those kind of conversations. So to circle back a little bit of also the progression of social emotional learning and some of the reasons that we also have implemented the survey results so that we can really speak to the resources and the interventions that we're providing for students, is that in 2021, Virginia Department of Education put out guidelines around social emotional learning, and those are based on the CASEL competencies. So if you went to Fairfax County or Alexandria, you would also see these social emotional learning guidance standards infused into how students are being supported. In this is linked, this is a very large document that goes into all of the different social emotional competencies, but then it also breaks it down by grade level, and they have them grouped in like grades 1 through 2, grades 5 through 6 or 7, I believe, and progressing up to really get at what's most developmentally appropriate of an expected social emotional benchmark for students that age to hit. So as opposed to saying we want them to be accomplishing these really big categories of emotional awareness or social awareness, it gets a little bit more specific that is really more developmentally appropriate, because all of this is really something that comes from your students' prefrontal cortex, and that of course is the last to be developed. So each student is going to, at different ages, is going to have a different ability in order to develop in these skill areas to accomplish some of those more healthy relationships with both themselves and the world around them and interacting. But I believe, Kathleen, is this going to be posted, the PowerPoint presentation, later on for families?
Yes, we'll be glad, with your permission, we'd be glad to post it, and we'll be able to post a link to this recording as well as the presentation slide deck, and the hyperlink should be in there.
Perfect. Then these will be linked in there for more information. They also have some family resources in there. There's some nice PBS videos that go into more detailed explanation of the different competencies as well, if it's something that you want a little bit more information on when you're looking through it. So when we're talking about these different categories, of course, the question is, I have the results, I have the survey results, but now what? If my student is having a lower strength in one area, how can I support that at home? So we're going to go through with different categories with just some ideas that you can try at home, and whatever works sort of best for your family based on where your student is. The first category would be in that self-management. And the first is just to have a visual feelings wheel. And that is, if you've seen them sort of look like a color wheel that you would choose paint colors for. But what that gives students is language. So if they have a relative lower strength in the self-management and they have a feelings wheel to refer to, if your student's getting really frustrated about something, or really upset about something, or maybe kind of sad and working into depression about something, having that feelings wheel, they can take a look at it and assign maybe a more accurate emotion to it. Because there's a great author, Dr. Daniel Siegel, and his saying is you have to name it to tame it. So by having more vocabulary and more categories for their feelings, it helps students, especially once they get into their teenage years, be able to feel like it's more manageable. It's not a light switch of a good emotion or a bad emotion. It's just where they are with their feelings, and can help sort of identify thoughts that are going towards those feelings, and are those accurate thoughts that are being assigned to those emotions as well. At home, you can have a coping skills area or a toolbox, or just an area that is a good safe place for your student to be able to reflect and manage their emotions. I highly recommend it being a place where it doesn't add to just distraction. Distraction is a nice coping skill sometimes for big emotions. However, if it's distraction to the point of avoidance, then that may be not the best skill or tool in that area. So maybe if video games is not as much of a distraction, but an avoidance, maybe that's not a good tool in their toolbox for that self-management, but more something else that they enjoy, such as music or drawing or crafts, or just something where it's a big comfy space that they can kind of feel enveloped by a bunch of pillows and blankets and things like that, that they can have that quiet moment. And one thing that will be a sort of thread throughout this is that modeling for when you're practicing good self-management or healthy self-management skills. So if you are driving in the car, and maybe with our lovely Northern Virginia traffic, can have lots of opportunities for outward monologuing and modeling some self-management skills with that stress. So if you're driving in the car and someone cuts you off, you can sort of think out loud, so to speak. Wow, that was really frustrating that that person cut me off. I feel like it was really unsafe. But if I react with higher emotions, I might be making it more unsafe for those around me. So I'm going to take some deep breaths and we're gonna move on with our commute. So just that sort of outward monologuing so that they can hear it. Because sometimes what's more powerful is what is seen practice as opposed to what is told to them as a good practice. Because many times if we say, you just need to take some deep breaths, you just need to walk away from the conversations, but in the day-to-day, they see us feeding into maybe emotions to where we can't make a rational decision, or we're not taking a deep breath or taking a break from a conversation. More likely they're going to default the habit to what is being modeled as opposed to what is being told to them to do. So talking through that and walking through that with your student is really helpful for them. And then there is a technique, it's called CRF framework. It just is sort of a nice system and sentence stem for them to be able to work through their thoughts and emotions. So it goes concern, feeling, request. So their concern is, their feeling is, and their request is. So the example that you might find common in your house is, my concern is that you've asked me to clean my room 5 times today. My feeling is annoyed because I'm trying to finish my schoolwork first. My request is that you give me a deadline to finish cleaning my room so that I can manage my own time. And that's an ideal, right? Wouldn't it be great if our students could completely articulate that? So that might start at a lower, more simplistic level, and work up to it. But it also is a nice communication tool for students that maybe don't have practice in articulating really where their frustration is. And then it gives you a window into their thinking that may be outwardly looking like just simple resistance to you, but there might be sort of a method to that, that they can now have a structure to articulate that to you. The next is growth mindset. And I think we've all kind of heard a lot of techniques around growth mindset. I think it can sometimes be one of the more intimidating to help support, because it is such a thinking skill. I will say growth mindset techniques really are going to be effective when a student is in a calmer state. Because when a student's going to be in a heightened emotional state, they're not going to have access to the parts of their brain that are necessary for that growth mindset work, which brings me to the first technique, which would be that reflecting journal. And sometimes students can be resisting to journaling, one, because it feels like a writing assignment. So I always remind students that grammar doesn't matter, spelling doesn't matter, none of it matters. And also it doesn't have to be handwritten. It could be something that they have in a Google Drive and just for themselves, and it's not shared with anybody. But it can be nice for both reflecting on their day, but also reflecting on a different time. So when students are having a really hard time with a test that's coming up and feeling like they're not going to do well, they might be able to reflect on another time that they had leading up to another test, and that they prepared for it, and maybe didn't do as badly as they thought, or just can learn some lessons from it. So growth mindset is really about students being able to develop the muscle that says, even if I don't know what's on the other side of this, I have what I need to see what's on the other side of this. Because one thing that any brain doesn't like, but in particular adolescent brain, does not like ambiguity and not knowing. So the brain is going to want to fill in the blanks with what is usually worst case scenario. But growth mindset is a way to just start to practice that muscle of being okay with the ambiguity, because what they can draw on is past success, and what they can draw on is the skills that they have practiced before or shown before. The other is what's called a growth circle. So if they have a goal in mind, they're going to have the goal. For this one, the example is, I want to be able to dribble a basketball between their legs, or maybe it's an academic related, or maybe it's social related. And so they already identify what they can already do, which helps the goal seem more attainable, right? Because they can already say, I'm already there with this skill. So for this example, they put that they already know how to dribble with one hand, so that the essential skill. And then they're going to put in some things that they can't quite yet do. And then that will also help set maybe some goals in between of what to be accomplished. So by doing that, rather than this is what I can do, and then there's nothing in between until I reach my goal, by identifying what they can't yet do, it helps them break down tasks, which is an important skill, but it also then logically provides some middle successes along the way to that ultimate goal. And then have them look at the strategies, which is also helpful with their self-management, because a strategy might be instead of playing video games when I come home, I'm going to dedicate time to go outside and practice basketball instead. And so not only are they practicing several different skills, growth mindset, self-management, time management, so you get several of those skills that are able to be practiced all in one. Kathleen, I can't see the chat, so if there's questions I need to answer, I'm happy to do that. Oh, that's from you. Okay.
Thanks, Elise. I think what we'll do is maybe if you want to continue, we'll stop the recording, and then parents can ask questions that will not be included in the recording.
Sounds good.
And no questions that I can see so far.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kathleen. All right. Our next is around that social awareness, which can become quite at the forefront in secondary, as I mentioned before. And they're really having to sometimes practice at those heightened levels, those social interactions. That's where we see certainly in middle school, supporting those changes in friendship, navigating, misunderstandings, and things like that. So that this becomes something where the impact of struggling with social awareness can sometimes be felt more deeply than in elementary school, because it could affect making and keeping friends, amongst other things. So the first would be also modeling, again, that theme of modeling that active listening with your conversations. And active listening also includes sometimes not wanting to fix, because I think all of our instincts as parents would be, I want to fix, I want to make it better. I can see you struggling. I know a better way to do it. I know how this can be fixed. But to be active listening and sort of really sitting in those conversations with your student, both positive and difficult, are really important, so that you can really connect with your student, both in the joys and in the discomfort of those. And that can be more powerful for your student, and also model that kind of waiting and letting somebody really work through what they're saying before you would contribute or offer suggestion or advice. I often, and it can be difficult because we're all kind of moving and going, is making a dinner time a part of your evening, as many evenings as possible. I know schedules get really busy, but also making that a screen-free time, so that you're having those conversations. Really helpful. That's a really nice time also to loop in the next point, which is the gratefulness and the gratitude. Starting and ending with that dinner time of not only sharing about your day, but maybe sharing something that you're grateful for. And it doesn't always have to be these, big sort of philosophical things. It can be, so maybe something today that I'm going to be grateful for is I had this presentation and I am really grateful that all the technology worked, because it doesn't always work smoothly. So that maybe would be one of mine, just to be grateful for. There's also making it screen-free. You can also loop in an activity for growth mindset, which is also, hey, what was tough today and how did you get through it? Let's all name something that was tough today and how we got through it. And then that's, you're being able to model and then sort of call more specific attention to those growth mindset opportunities. But that becomes difficult to have if you don't have that kind of screen-free time with each other. You can also accomplish the gratitude practices through journaling as well. So with that growth mindset, when they're going through their days, it's usually recommended start that journaling, and that can also be a good activating activity if a student is like, well, I don't know where to start. Start your journaling always with 3 things you're grateful for. That's a nice way to kind of get that going, and then it can maybe progress into the other self-reflections for the day. And then just supporting with that perspective taking, and that can happen both in if they're telling you a situation that happened with a friend or a teacher or just a day-to-day interaction, but also just when you're watching a movie or TV together, or you're watching your favorite show, just really reflecting of being like, how would you have reacted in that situation? I don't know if I would be able to react that way, or wow, that character had a really strong reaction. How do you think that affected, that seemed to have maybe damaged that friendship a bit? So just having some of that reflection during those shows, and they may contribute. They may say, that's exactly what I was thinking. So it opens the door to sort of calling attention rather than just sort of always passively watching something and connecting to those lessons. The last one is the self-efficacy. For the self-efficacy, it is that, remember that idea of, can I do hard things later? Do I have what I need to accomplish what I want? So the first just kind of trick one is called an if-then plan. This helps students shift their focus to the specific actions that will lead to meeting their goals, and also helps with that growth mindset. So the example would be, you may want to see your student study more for a test. Maybe if that's an area that your student is still struggling making time with, Maybe their studying right now is reading twice through the study guide they were given, and that's what they think is studying. And that they maybe need to try it in more ways and learn the material in different ways. So their if then statement could be, if it's 2:30 p.m., then I'll spend time reviewing practice problems for 30 minutes. And so that helps them make it really specific for them to be able to accomplish the additional time in studying or whatever their goal may be. The support with mindfulness practices. It's sort of kind of a hot button right now, and we hear it in a lot of different ways, but there continues to be more and more and more research around the benefits of the mindfulness practices. And that doesn't have to be, I go and I sit in a quiet space with my legs crossed for 30 minutes in complete silence. Mindfulness practices can be, I stop and I take a moment and I notice all my 5 senses. I notice, what do I see? What do I hear? Everything around them. So it's a practice of being in the moment. And when we're talking about self-efficacy, sometimes what gets in the way of our self-efficacy is the negative thoughts. And it's really difficult to have a negative thought loop when you ground yourself and take a moment and become very present, because by being present, then you're not going to be worrying about the future or having a negative reflection on the past. So it's a good way to strengthen those pathways in the brain that help you stay in the moment in order to make maybe a different decision about those next thoughts. Which brings me to the next point, which is helping your student reframe the negative thoughts. And it can be really difficult, because when you hear your students sort of having a lot of negative self-talk, the temptation is to just say, no, you're great, you can do this. And those are all really helpful, supportive statements. But they're also at a point where they don't really believe it right now. So helping them sort of analyze their own negative thoughts is a more helpful, supportive way to help them kind of get out of that negative loop. And then at a different time where you do see them doing something that they were maybe having negative self-talk, that would be a time to say, I just noticed that you were, weren't getting upset. I could see you were about to get upset, and I noticed you take a deep breath. I'm really proud of you for doing that. And that is a maybe more impactful way to support them in that progress. So talking about what else our child can say in calm moments. If your student struggles with a more positive self-talk, it can be really helpful to have some sentence starters or have some things that they already have that are go-tos, rather than having to think of something on the spot. That can be really daunting to do when you're already in a state of negative self-talk. So if they have something that they can ground to in order to practice that skill, that's helpful as well. And then just the statement, what is maybe a more helpful thought for yourself? And to kind of pair, I'm going to skip one just because it goes well with it, is that investigating unhelpful thoughts. So if it's, I'm not good at this, I'm just not a math, I'm never going to be good at math, I'm not a math person. Well, what makes you think that? What's contributing to that? What evidence do you have? And it could be because math is hard. It could be because they're comparing where they are in math to the peers around them. And then that's an opportune time to remind them, yes, but last year you didn't know all of this and you stuck with it, and now you're so much stronger in math. So it helps not only that self-efficacy of helping with those negative thoughts, but ties back into also that growth mindset of reminding them that they did have a point where they didn't know a lot, and they worked through it and they progressed, and they're further along than they were yesterday. It's really important to remind not only ourselves, but our students not to use people around them as their measuring sticks, but use them from yesterday as their measuring stick for growth. And that can be a really difficult thing to practice, but sometimes with reminders, it can become more of a practice than using their friend or their classmate or what they see on social media as their measuring stick of where they're supposed to be. And then the last one that's kind of more of like a tip trick that I have always really loved to use with students that I work with is best case scenario, worst case scenario, most likely scenario. The student, if your student's really having a hard time, they're probably already good with the worst case scenario, but they can articulate the worst case scenario and then ask them to articulate, well, what's the best case scenario? Magic wand, what's the best case scenario? And then once they've presented those, they kind of will be able to articulate the most likely scenario. And I found that students, whether they were 10 or whether they were 14, were able to do this with the most likely scenario because they take what they think is the worst and the ideal, which may or may not be unrealistic, and say, well, this will happen, but then it'll be okay because this will also happen. So students actually do quite well with that activity, and it helps them with that, certainly with that self-efficacy, because they're looking forward and thinking and gaining a more realistic perception about what will happen. And then lastly, just to kind of wrap it up, is if you are working with your child and you are noticing that you do have concerns about kind of where they are at with their social emotional growth, it is definitely a team to support your child's growth. Obviously, you as the parent is part of the team. We have school social workers and school psychologists that are here to support. Classroom teachers are supportive. As I said, we're doing SEL lessons through our teacher advisory period here at Williamsburg multiple times a week. And I know that's the case at many other schools. And then you also have the grade level school counselor, or however it's structured, your child's school counselor. They're there as both a resource to support the student directly, but also help you as the parent sort of navigate maybe a time when there might be additional resources to support your student if they're really struggling with their social emotional growth. But each student is also unique. So that's also a good time to reach out to school social workers, psychologists, school counselor, to even kind of get maybe a sense of, I think they're on the right track, but I'm a little bit concerned that they're not. Can we talk about where they are and what we're seeing at home? Because sometimes, if your student is struggling in different areas, many times they will save it all for you at home because you are the safest place for them. And they probably use a lot of their self-management skills at school for a variety of reasons, and that those self-management skills can be depleted when they get home, which is why sometimes you'll see behaviors at home that we may not see here at school. But that is a good conversation to have to help support your students' growth. And that is the end of the presentation. If there are any questions.
All right. First, before we turn to questions, Elise, I wanted to thank you so much. I think the very best presentation